Okay. Hello everyone, welcome to this evening's episode. The title is "The Intellect Can Suffer If There Is No Faith in Others." And I was thinking about reality to just dive into it. I was thinking of reality, and I was thinking about knowledge, and I was thinking about how do human beings intake a fractal universe. And a fractal is this idea that what is the pattern found in the microcosm is echoing in the macrocosm and even to the macrocosm of the macrocosm. In the subtitle I have written the sword and shield of intelligence. And I am not a medieval knight giving this talk, but these two metaphors. Okay, so I guess a mid-intro reset. So the title is "The Intellect Can Suffer If There's No Faith in Others." I was looking at the concept of metaphors. I wondered about the human intelligence, and I managed to put it into a metaphor of a sword and shield. In this episode, I'm going to explain in some sense that if we were to use the intelligence like the sword and shield, what would it look like? And why is it that if the intellect isolates itself in a world of its own, self-proclaimed godhood or clarity, in some sense it misses out on the world, even though we're individuals and we have our inner realms and we can make our inner realms the most significant part of our lives, but we are actually here individualized, and we are here individualized with other individuals. And as much as man claims an individual, a solo purpose to reality, a sort of mission of his own, there is the collective mission. There is something about reality that it is not a one-man job, it is an 8 billion human being, advanced human being job, My aim in explaining communication, and I don't know if people notice it sometimes in the episodes, the intensity of my speech, I do feel like a swordsman behind my eyes sometimes, but I am not slashing through objects, I am slashing through subjects, or the implication of a subject. So, I'll begin from here, that when I was young, very young, I have a twin brother, and when we were I think maybe 9 or 8, we would play these games where we would activate it with our imagination, of course, but we would play these games where you can select, not online games, a kind of role-playing, kind of like with small toys. We would play this game where you would select yourself as a character. And I remember in my youth, I was fascinated by characteristics way bigger than me, And I always remember that my twin brother would choose the warrior archetype, I would choose the mage archetype. And the reason I would choose the mage archetype, because from an early age, controlling more than your body was fascinating to me. Controlling more than a body, like a biological body, was fascinating. Imagine a character that can't swing a sword well, but can move mountains, or can wield, can animate fire, or whatnot. Anyways, so I am saying that I am really at my heart's content. I don't know if I fit the warrior archetype, but I have understood the warrior archetype, and I will share as much of it as I can, but I will tell you that they're 100% more experienced, maybe not in the inner realms, but in the outer realms, 100% more experienced warriors to learn from. That means when it comes to the outer realms, I have, in some sense, already bowed to the masters of, external movement. But when it comes to the inner realms, I have found myself peacefully walking in my, I would say it in a sense where I found I have gone through turbulence in my inner realms, and psychological turbulence means it's the test of character, and it's the strength of the free will to change the attention from what it is seeing. So I have, in some sense, never in the outer realms, I don't know, I was not drawn to it to be a violent person, to pick up a sword and shield and to kind of, brutalize the outer realms to feel powerful, never that kind of mentality. But there has been certain questions, universal questions that have taunted me in the inner realms. That means imagine, a person making fun of a person and the person can feel something, but then imagine a world making fun of you. And that would be another way of the universe being set in a situation where man doesn't know. He can know though, but what does he do? And I would say I am a person who sometimes I feel like I'm a bird on a branch, and I'm seeing other branches, or I'm seeing the branch I'm on, but I can fly to other branches. So in this episode, I shall try to fulfill whatever warrior archetype perception my consciousness allows. The intellect is often compared to a sharp weapon. A weapon gets the person a certain result, and I'm talking as if we were in the medieval times, as if we were still like in a sword and shield era. Right nowadays, people, they walk only like with their phones in their pocket. Back in the day, they would walk with a giant metal shield and a giant metal sword. Can you imagine just like carrying giant, just chunks of metal around the whole time? The intellect, like a sword, just like a sword can be sharpened, a person's attention to their inner realms and outer realms can be sharpened. Attention to the outer realms is actually navigation of the biological body, and there's people who are doing this differently. Some people navigate their body as if they feel they are their body. Some people navigate their body as if it is present in the field of their mind, and some people navigate their body as if it's the unknown soul moving the body in the moment. Pretty much all those human beings who go in the zone, it's kind of like the body goes on auto cruise, the mind goes on auto cruise, and the soul dances. In my family history, I'm not going to be specific, but one of my uncles is a very smart person, very educated person, but in his intellect made him isolate himself from others, and so that is in some sense a disadvantage of the intellect, where I would recommend anybody in some sort of intellectual pursuit, you have to go towards humility through silliness. It's as if too much of the intellect, the person is only holding their sword in their hand, they're not holding the shield. Too much of just an emotional consciousness, awareness to the moment, and the person is holding their shield more than their sword. It's kind of poetic. It's like the right side of the brain is the creative dimension, and creativity, as the name describes, is in some sense originating movement. So the shield doesn't move, the shield takes in movement, and you can say the sword moves, right? So we can say the right side of the brain, in some sense, in our modern times, decided to be a sort of It's like the right hemisphere is creative, the left hemisphere is analytical. It's like our right side of our brain, the creative side, is the sword again, and the analytical side is the shield. Now, we think the intellect is just the shield, but I would say the intellect is really the direction provider. That means when I think about my intelligence, there is a huge percentage of it automatically happening. That's why we call ourselves natural beings. But the dimensions that are not automatically happening, that require the brushing of the free will upon them, whatever kind of warrior you are, whatever ratio of usage of the brain or the type of expression or reception vibe mode the person goes in, I'm telling you, you will realize in modern times our mind is a tool, a technology. But if you were old school, you would see your mind as a weapon. And so just like let's say a knife can be used to cut fruit, or it can be used to hurt people. And so the intellect can be used to hurt people, and it can be used to help people. But also the intellect can be used to hurt oneself and also be used to help oneself. Just to go back to the example of one of my uncles who took the path of intellect. The path of intellect, because it passes over emotions quickly, or emotions are, rather than listened to, filtered towards reason. You can say an intellectual person wants to understand through reason everything, and their emotions are not reasonable, So if a person really goes too much into the intellect, you will find yourself having a sort of kind of solo kingdom. I'm trying to explain this better. I think I'm not doing a good job. Let me think of another example. So this uncle or let me just establish the example a bit better. So this uncle of mine, very smart person, but because of his intelligence, he separates himself from the crowd, therefore he cannot connect emotionally to the crowd. And any time a person considers themselves superior to the environment, they disconnect with the environment, And that's why I'm saying the intellect can suffer if there's no faith in others. Because if I, like right now, I'm giving a talk, if I think my inner realms are way more correct than the outer realms, and there's nothing else for the outer realms to teach me, in some sense I lock myself in my inner realms, in some sense being lost in a belief realm. Let us use the metaphor of a smart person in society equivalent to, let's say, an expert swordsman walking alone in the land, okay? Let's just imagine that you are like whoever's listening to me. Poetically imagine that in the past you were a great warrior, and so you're walking alone, and because you have ascended to a sort of mastery of your art form or your practice or your swordsmanship, you have reached a point where you are fearless. So a master swordsman walks fearlessly in the world, or a true warrior walks fearlessly in the world. Even if there is fear, there's nothing to fear about the fear, because even if there's a fear, there will come its karmic moment of occurrence, right? Everything that is meant to happen poetically happens, and everything that is not meant to happen, it never touches us. Imagine that this master swordsman suddenly comes across another master swordsman, and the two swordsmen in the forest passing by for a second exchange glances, and it's as if they have walked for days without any practice or training, and both, let's say, master swordsmen decide to engage in combat, but it's as if their minds already know what's going on, as if the body language of the moment has spoken louder than the mind can. Now imagine that one of these swordsmen has practiced a jumping technique, mobility, has practiced mobility, and the other swordsman has practiced strength. And so when it comes to the engagement of, let's say, both types of intellect, and there's different types of intellect based on how you have sharpened your weapon. Sometimes I see people, and the way I see their mind in a very poetic way to explain. Some people are holding spears, some people are holding swords, some people are holding daggers, some people are holding giant shields, some people are not, right? Some people in the world, especially young children that enter the world, it's as if their intellect has not picked up the meaning of the realm yet to identify. It's as if our armor is our memory, and so if our memory is extensive, then we have incredible armor. But if our memory is not extensive and our information accumulation is limited, then in some sense it's like the less of the battlefield you see, the less you can do in the battlefield. Sorry, guys. Air pollution is out of control. There is no simplicity if one engages the complex dimensions of life. And what I mean, there is no simplicity, it's like rather than the person wanting a simple life or being, let's say, obsessed to have a hard life, the person doesn't judge life and understands that it's like the weather. And there are some warriors that the way they stand to themselves is fixed, as if they learned something from a teacher and they're never changing. Then there are those warriors who no longer learn, you can say, from teachers or techniques. There are the warriors that have transcended, the teaching level of consciousness, and they have gone into the experientially updating themselves endlessly kind of state of consciousness. Imagine that both warriors in the forest that have met each other, let's say warrior A and warrior B, swordsman A and swordsman B. Swordsman A, let's say, is from a certain school of martial art. I suggested mobility, but I don't know, let's say just a specific school of martial art, and the other one is from another school of swordsmanship. And okay, here, I'll make it detailed. Let's say one soldier has two swords, and one soldier has a giant shield and a sword. And when they have to fight in combat, they have to use what they have. And really, when we use our intelligence in society, we use what we have. There was this. I'm a very big fan of stories, and my hobby, one of my hobbies, is to research stories and try to see how incredible they are in accordance to universal design. And there was this recent story I saw, which was this Japanese adaptation of the gods of mythology, Greek mythology. And there was this concept of Ragnarok, and it's not in accordance to the Viking Norse mythology per se exactly, but in this show it was a sort of war between the warriors of mankind and the warriors of God. Excuse me, not the warriors of God, gods, right? It was a war between man and God. I would say in today's society, this is happening on an inner realm. Man and God, these ideas are conflicting in the inner realms. But in ancient mythology, let's say there was this idea that man and God were at war. The gods, in a polytheistic sense, not a monotheistic sense. And in this show, there was a character who was a swordsman, and this swordsman had, in some sense, intentionally lost. And some people were wondering in this show, like just in the universe of this narrative I'm telling you, how was it that a loser became the representative of the human race against a battle between the gods, And so the narrative is very fascinating because it dives into it. It goes into a flashback of how this loser swordsman has ended up becoming the greatest swordsman of humanity. And it shows this guy's ingenious technique, where this man was a swordsman who he would go and fight the most mightiest, the most greatest swordsman, and he would lose intentionally. But the moment he would fight them, he would understand how they fight, and he would leave the battlefield, close his eyes, and like from numbers of like 100, 200, even 1,000 times, he would fight that person in the inner realm. Right? So that means there were some warriors, you can say, who, this is just archetypal kind of extraction of meaning, but I will tell you, it's like some warriors, right? They are fighting the war way before they actually externally move. That means their minds have already engaged in the future of the outer realms. In this show, this warrior pretty much fights master swordsman, and the moment he's about to die, he says, "I surrender." But to him, he's becoming more victorious because it's information accumulation, it's technique accumulation. And in this narrative, you realize this person has been, in some sense, from every moment of his life, whether there was a failure, whether there was a victory, he was just mastering his technique, you know? He was learning from everything in the world and how everything in the world can also move in your inner realms. That means if you want to, let's say, move a sword in the outer realms, it takes a certain amount of energy. But if you close your eyes for a moment and sit down, let's say somebody is like in their living room, and they close their eyes and they suddenly see themselves with, for example, just doing some next level kind of sword fighting or something in their inner realms, in their own living room. Right? So the mind can give this permission to animate reality differently than how, in some sense, it is happening in the outer realms. A person can look at a new bottle of water, and in their inner realms, they see themselves opening it, but in the outer realms, they haven't opened it. And then they get the thought and they open it, right? That's how we perceive it. So it's the same, that in your inner realms you can move before you move in the outer realms, and if you move quickly, you see multiple probabilities before the event moves on, before the moment changes. I feel the same way. I'll kind of wrap up the metaphor I was saying of the swordsman. Those two swordsmen, they fight with each other, and their inner realms are fighting first, then their outer realms follow, and the one whose inner realms is ahead tends to win. You know, there's this scene that I'll never forget. I saw it in a martial art movie. I don't know what movie it was though. And there was this master martial artist, and he was being attacked by a bunch of people, you know. And the people who were attacking him had a very hatred-oriented mind, like, I'm gonna kill you, you know. But this master did not have that mindset. This master swordsman was in some sense in a world where he had already been victorious, and he was walking in the garden after the battle. Can you imagine? You know, or you can say it's like someone playing billiard, and in their inner realms they have already won, let's say, 5 rounds of billiard before they play it. You know, their state of being is like at a level where it is as if it's already victorious. And we can say our intellect is the reaction of our intelligence to a changing world. To me personally, this concept of the sword and shield, I would say anytime something happens, so let's say we start off as an individual personality, you know, we're like, all right, I'm one person in this giant world, you know, and the person's going about, and let's say there's moments where the story, the outer realms bring suffering and kind of suffocates the story of one's ego, you know. And so what does one do? You know, in those moments where the outer realms is overpowering me, I in some sense become selfless. Because if the more you're a self and the more there is pain, the more there is the registration of pain in a conscious field, you know. So I would say selflessness is a shielding method, and selfishness is an attacking method. And when a person becomes selfish, they are in some sense claiming the moment. Do you see how fascinating it is? This world is honestly one of the most strangest and coolest things ever to happen. In the sense that people, their decisions activate their psychology on Earth, right? So that means there is an additional room. I'm telling you, I'm so happy, you know, I started talking about the inner realms, to be honest. Because it has always been there. We have been oblivious to something that is in some sense us. You know, I would say that I do sometimes some uncommon things. There are moments in my life where I pray for my future self. You know, I perceive scenarios that can potentially happen, and I just make a request to the universe. But this request to the universe is not out of the absence of one's service to the universe, you know. It's as if there's a difference between being a rogue soldier and then being a soldier as part of an army. When you're a soldier, part of an army, that means you're protected by the army. But here's the thing, the army is governed also, right? So in reality, man either becomes his own system. What option does he have? He becomes his own system, or he joins other systems. And if systems are not updating fast enough, all that man can do is begin his own new system. This is why art always has a rebellious nature. You see, there is also this thing about knowledge, where I would say the more a person knows, the more the world has shape. Like, let's say you are in the medical practice, and somebody talks about the human body, and let's say the average man knows, like, the basic positioning, like the skeleton, the muscles, the tissues, and all of this, but all the details, in some sense, the medical practitioner has access to, or knows, or has cared to know. In my inner realms, there has been moments where I have been overwhelmed. I remember once I had a dream, and it was a very, very uncomfortable dream. It was this dream that I was in this hallway running, and then I trip on my face, so my face is on the ground, and then this army walks over me. This kind of, there's this giant marching movement, and it's as if kind of getting crushed by, a giant movement. So in those moments, and of course, guys, we have this humanized concept of death, but what it is actually a shift of attention. It's like we as a species have not concluded globally yet that we are a multidimensional entity, and what that means is we are entitled to different levels of how reality is being. Somebody once said also, like, meditation is like listening to the universe, and prayer is like speaking to the universe. I would say just anything that leaves the human being is in some sense similar to an attack. And anything that the person receives is like a defense. Right now, the sounds of the birds that I'm hearing, the breeze, all my sensory perception, all the colors I'm seeing, all, my neighbors I'm seeing right now, everything I'm saying, this is in some sense, it's as if my consciousness is like a vacuum, and it's like the glow of a candle, and everything inside it is kept by that glow, In moments of death, the inevitable is selflessness. And in moments of birth, the inevitable is selfishness. And so this is the cycle of samsara, as the sages said, that you endlessly revolve through the states of a creative mind, an expressive state. This expressive state maintains itself, and its maintenance in the space-time continuum is change. And as it changes, eventually it stops changing. So there is literally like, one, two, three worlds we die through. That means we actually, before we have physical death, there's 3 worlds we exit from. We kind of 3 doorways we pass through. And I would say the first doorway is to explore one's creative existence. Anybody who's been a child and pretty much grown up on this earth, you have experienced the creative human design's evolution to some degree consciously. And the questions of psychology are so deep that we can say, if we weren't conscious but we were born, would we be people or not? The mind can be commanded. The mind can be thrown, the mind can strike like a scorpion's sting, you know, or like a snake bite, you know. The mind can have that instantaneity. If a person is unconscious, you know, their cruelty can be like a lightning strike in the moment, to be honest. The three doorways are how the world starts. After we have fully experienced the creation phase, we experience the maintenance of creation phase. After we have consciously experienced the maintenance of the creation, we consciously experience to what the creation is there. That means from our creation, it's, you know what it is, it's like we're this truth trying to get back to its origin, and in its way of getting back to its origin, it is just going through all that it is not. Right? You know, there could be this attitude that everything we see we are, or there could be this attitude that everything we see we are not. Right? Eventually, once one has experienced the conscious self in the conscious world and has attained mastery or cultivated experiential familiarity, eventually we go on to the unconscious self and the unconscious world. That means spirituality cannot be avoided. Multidimensionalism cannot be avoided. And the mind truly is an instrument that can be used. You know, a person can again hit the sword as if they are walking in a peaceful garden, or they're playing a beautiful instrument, or the person can fight in a way where it's as if they're just trying to escape hell. And honestly, when it comes to any sort of intellectual activity or any sort of sword fighting, like I'm just thinking, sometimes I think like if I was back in the day, how would I fight? And I would say that I have concluded that I would fight with a mirror, with a shield that looks like a mirror on one side. And most likely a spear, or maybe just a spear alone. Yeah, definitely, if this was like medieval times, I would definitely fight with a spear. You know, guys, this is like a bit, it's not off topic, but there was a time I was raking leaves, and in my inner realms, I perceived that I was in a completely different biological setting, and I was moving, you know, this stick in a different way, where I started dancing in the garden with the rake in my hand, you know. I am telling you, the world has rhythm, okay? It is alive, it is intelligent, and to be a good warrior doesn't mean just even to wield your weapon or wield your intelligence. But I would say it means to use your mind to solve all problems, so the body actually utilizes the least amount of energy. I mean, I would say that the mind is also different than a weapon, in the sense that weapon is an inanimate object, so it's conditional. That means when somebody, imagine back in the day, you're holding a sword or a spear, the spear doesn't change form, it doesn't change shape, it doesn't change context. The spear remains, the object remains an object. But in some sense, the ideology that is accessible to the human being in any moment is like the inner armor, weapon, sword, and shield that is carrying. The mind is armed with vision and language and geometry, and the body is armed just with an object or whatever you can find to defend yourself in a cruel world. The mind is also alive, and I will tell you, just like in a dream state, it's automated. Like some dreams, sure, a person can, they call it lucid dreaming. The person can walk in their dream state, be conscious. I've personally experienced this, but usually most of my dreams are automated. That means I'm already moving. It's like the dream is like a roller coaster, and it's like just an attributeless watcher is just found in that realm, you know. By the way, anybody who has questions or wants me to look further into a certain idea, feel free to share in the chat section. And honestly, if this episode is dedicated to the warrior archetype, I'm trying to think in which domains of my life I have really been a warrior, in which dimensions there was something that I fought for. And I'll be honest, you know, I fought for my biological survival in the sense of like listening to the body's requirements. But I will tell you the future. I have been maybe since 2014 indirectly at a war with extinction, with this extinction of the species idea. I am telling you, it's like there is something so much deeper than everything we have seen so far. That truth is, the best way to define truth is that it's going to be a surprise. Seldom is this said. A truth is a gift that we can open if we actually notice the gift. You know, skill cannot be achieved until the inner realms have scanned the possibility. A person can learn from anything, and imagine a person, let's say right now, okay, here, I'll take this up a notch. Let's say whoever you are right now, you are a person who you have mastered all outer realm movement to a point where every athlete on the planet was like, yo, this person is like the closest thing to a machine that a human being can get to, right? So imagine we have an incredible, I don't want to say like like how Friedrich Nietzsche perceived like the Ubermensch, and in some sense Friedrich Nietzsche's sister took Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy to like Germany, and some messed up stuff happened there. But I'm telling you, it's as if we think of the ultimate outer realm advancement, right? And it would, let's say, be an incredibly healthy biological body that can move in any angle and has a strength beyond its own weight a couple times, right? Usually for bodybuilders, they say you should be able to lift twice your own weight. So if we had mastered everything there was to do, or let's even take this idea of swordsmanship. Let's say you were a swordsman and you had studied all swordsmanship, and you had even become friends with a time traveler, and you're like, hey, can I borrow your time travel machine and go learn from other swordsmen in the timeline? And let's say the time traveler was like, sure, man, yeah, good. Okay, and so let's say this person had gone, this swordsman had gone and learned every swordsmanship style in history, and the only thing that would be left is the swordsmanship style that hasn't arose yet. You see? So it's as if after you master the past, the present is like, hey, there's the future right here. What do I do with this? You know? You know what it is? It's kind of like the body is like a soldier, the mind is a commanding officer, and the mind is telling the body, is telling the soul, which is the general, about all the mistakes in the past, right? And the general's like, are you done, commanding officer? And the commanding officer's like, yeah, you know, and then the future is engaged, you see. Upon mastery of the outer realms, we are left to master our inner realms. In the inner realms, our expression and engagement, our free will's decision making is the sword, and observance of how the world makes a decision first before us is like the shield. So honestly, I would even simply just tell you the essence of this episode is that the shield is when you observe life. You know, when you are in some sense just a watcher, an invisible watcher of a visible world, you know. That's kind of like the ultimate shield. You have become the untouchable in your inner character. So the inner character has not become immortal, but has become eternal. And an eternal being doesn't have limited conception on energy, so nobody can defeat an immortal warrior. Why? Because the immortal warrior is not bound by time. There is no limit, right? But the hilarious thing is time, change, not time, but the change, how the world changes, the world defeats the immortal. That means all immortals, anybody who even wants to become an immortal, you kind of declare war against the world, against the nature of things. You know, but eternity is a totally different discussion, of course. Okay. The human being went into silence. It mastered noise. It mastered movement. Let's say it mastered noise. It went into stillness. It mastered movement. It went into movement, it mastered stillness. It went into noise, it mastered silence. The inner realms and outer realms were fully explored, and then the witness stands as a, edgeless moment of awareness. The next phase is trust, and not just faith in others, but also faith in the invisible other. In this life, whoever you are listening, if you're choosing to live as a mind, the mind is an unknown intelligent activity. This unknown intelligent activity, based on how it knows itself in any sort of exploration, in order to see what is familiar or not, throws back the past as an overlay onto the future, onto the new. So novelty is being compared to everything we have seen before, so direct experience is sort of its own update. When I say faith in others, I mean, this is an obvious thing, we're 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere, and if the universe had intended for us to only be solipsists, there would be no other people.
Do you know what I mean? That means if reality wanted an inner realm, there was no need to have existence. I'll say it in another way. When a person dreams, their body is in the bed sleeping, and their mind creates a world and a body where they move in the dream. So that means whether the body is, we are existing consciously, it's like conscious existence is not a limitation on the brain simulating in the inner realms its own paradise. So there's like this intelligence that can instantly animate thought and subjects, and so it finds itself in an objective world, and by realizing that it is the mover of the subject, not even the subject itself, it frees itself from how any object has become a subject and any subject become an object. After we have distrusted the known universe and then trusted the known universe, we will go on to distrust the unknown universe to then trust the unknown universe. The unknown. When you trust the unknown for the first time, it doesn't matter if it's one sword, what kind of weapon you have, it's a collective movement, right? You can totally see that human beings who back in the day had to protect their kingdom, from other kingdoms, human beings would unite under the same cause and it become a defensive movement. That means you can say the army was one of the first images of a collective being in motion. That means if you were an extraterrestrial watching from the sky, like medieval, or Roman generals, like at war, be like, in some sense, you would think the general is controlling the whole army as if it's one being controlling, all those beings, right? So it's a collective movement. I reached a sort of solipsistic paradise in my inner realms, and what ends up happening is like you dwell in your inner realms and then you get bored. That means it's hilarious. We came into the outer realms, and we started in the outer realms. We got bored of the outer realms. We noticed the inner realms. We got into the inner realms. We got bored of the inner realms. We're back at the outer realms. Now we're reaching a point where the inner-outer realm model even is transitioned beyond, right? Now it needs to, for the next 1,000 years, it needs to come into a historic context. But beyond that, it's unnecessary. Working with the logos means you have trusted the universe, and just like a swordsman trusts their sword in their hand, right? It's as if the awareness of the moment trusts the content that it is experiencing its existence. That trust is key. Right now, I will tell you there is a human level of trust I have in myself in giving this talk, but there's also a very irrelevant to the human idea trust, where ultimately at the end of whatever I'm doing in the moment, there is awareness just being. Because I've realized awareness is being regardless of what I do. It's kind of like you are freed from karma. When you realize the cause of intelligence is collective, the individual no longer gets attached to their, believe it or not, to one's own individualism, right? But in the outer realms, we do need trust in objects, and in the inner realms, we do need, for now, trust in subjects. Eventually, the species, I predict this is really far in the future, but 3,600 years from now, the species is going to walk over the language threshold, which means that we will actually have completed our work, our great work as a species, in the objective and subjective domains. We lived well as bodies, we lived well as minds, and then the Supreme is its own show. You know, when choosing this picture for this episode, there was something about this picture that was just, I don't know, I just felt the world had to see this artwork. I don't know who drew it. But if you look at those two characters and you look at their fighting, you see that in order to be able to even wield a sword, you must have a structure to your existence, right? The sword must be grounded, right? Because in the attempt of shielding oneself, you need to exert strength. And even in a mode of attack, let's say again medieval combat style, you gotta be able to strength the right effort and then the right technique. That means after you have become strong, then you practice technique, you know. Or if you're smart, you practice your technique first, then your strength becomes the enhancement of your own technique. By the way, guys, it's the 4th of July, so, you know, happy 4th of July for whoever that, you know, celebrates time. It's just expression, freedom of expression. The mind has to create the freedom of expression, and then the body follows that outline. The person sees in their inner realms a possibility to wield the sword in a certain way, then the next thing is trust the moment and then see how it looks like. Because I'm telling you, in my inner realms, I am like giving the most, you know, impeccable talk to myself. But in the outer realms, you know, it's not 100% the relay from the inner realms, you know. That means it's not just meaning that gets lost in translation. Sometimes art gets lost in translation as well, you know. There's deeper dimensions to everything, and as far as the attention can go, the dimensions can grow. I would say, in my inner realms, wielded geometry like a sword. Like, definitely this is something I should talk about. I play with geometry in my inner realms, and when I say geometry, I don't mean geometrical entities, I mean geometrical shapes. That means I'm someone who, my imagination has a geometrical dimension to it. Or what we consider imagination. My inner realms, there's a geometrical, just automatically. I will tell you, it's something so natural that I think I was just born with it in this life. But it was like, so my relationship with the geometry of my inner realms is that through a concept of actually caring for the beauty of an experience, I managed to see the experience from an emotionally detached state. Right? Because you got to think about it based on the length of an activity. One then allows how, you know, think of it this way. Let's say every human being is an emotional human being, but these emotions have layers upon them, you know, like layers of snow upon them, right? And sometimes the snow can layer one's emotions to such a degree where a person can feel like they're a machine walking in a desert, in a forest, you know, endlessly. Like you know, a person can get that kind of feeling. But ultimate mastery means you have done something so much that you instantaneously trust it, and anything a person instantaneously trusts in doing, they have mastery, you know? They attain mastery. In my inner realms, I have moved geometry. I'll tell you, like just like the Transformer movie, I saw this YouTube video, and this YouTube video just inspired it allowed my inner realms to kind of shift, right? And in this YouTube video, there was this kind of kid who was bored at a concert, this classical kind of music concert, where this symphony this conductor was like, conducting a symphony. And this kid, without realizing like the parent is filming the kid, anytime there's something intense, the kid raises his hand as if his hand is raising the volume, right? So we can synchronize our outer realms behavior to the inner realms movement. That means if the mind sees something further, the body can instantly adjust. Or when somebody throws a baseball at you, you can instantly you can notice it's coming and catch it, right? And that moment when the baseball is getting nearer and nearer to the person and the person's noticing it, the brain is like lightning storms are happening in the brain, and instantly it's as if the person's simulations of what is going on, one of them is decided upon, and the hand moves and catches the ball in there. Also, when it comes to the warrior archetype, as I was speaking about it earlier today, being weak is nothing to be ashamed of. Staying weak is this. This was from this comic-based show called Black Clover. And whatever a human being does, anything they do, you can suddenly add, I don't know if the right word is elegance or cadence, but you can take the presence of your own soul seriously, like a person can do that. And I don't know, guys, there are days where I feel like an ant on an anthill that has noticed there's much more superior things. Imagine a person going to work looking at an ant, and imagine a human being looking at the sky, wondering if there's observers in the world. A very heavy metaphysical idea could be that emptiness is an illusion, which renders reality absolutely being one of pure being. That means there is no concept of creation or destruction. Life and death is only for the animal psychology. Beyond the animal psychology, through the cracks in the concept of time and how attention and presence are just like a moment, and if the person is simple, in their inner realms, complexity approaches them. If they're complex, simplicity approaches them. One can say everything, at least I don't know, the way I am going through life is that my brain is like a strategy formulator, and everything I see, it just like a mathematical equation has variables. That means my inner realms has a projection, and just like an equation, there's an equal sign to my outer realms. So imagine there's an equation that's inner realms equals outer realms, but now it's not just inner realms equals outer realms, it's outer realms plus unknown x variable equals inner realms plus unknown x variable, or unknown y variable, So there's a dimension of mystery accompanying everything we have ever known. And that dimension of mystery is our attention being of unknown origin, because meaning that is kept in language is man-made. A philosopher saw the militant atheist shouting, at the, let's say simple-minded theist, God is a man-made idea, wake up, And then suddenly the philosopher, through a, let's say, sarcastic mimicking of the militant atheist attitude, says the idea of man is man-made, wake up. That means the void is mystery. That means it's like if there's a dark room and let's say there's a box like Mario and there's a question mark or something. The question mark, the mystery is the box. And anybody who, let's say you think of it this way, let's say you're someone who has successfully, through your their first try mastered all the techniques of a certain art form. And then you realize the only thing left for you to experience is what failure provides. That means if a master is like a full 360 view of all the possible experiences that one can have with that field or wherever their concentration point is on. Everything is just exposure to possibility of worldhood. It's as if the past is distracting us from a future that could be totally different to it. You know, this is why I'm saying, like, we should have, in some sense, two types of civilizations, a yin-yang civilization. One civilization timeless, one civilization time-based. Intelligence is energy's destiny. And you know, it's like a moment where the person's like, oh my God, am I being the energy of the universe right now? Am I being, you know, the first individually conscious expression of universal energy? You know? And you know, guys, if the mind can be seen, like if we can say there's arts like martial arts, different type of martial arts or swordsmanship in the outer realms, we should totally have this thing in culture going on where every person who communicates, they have a sort of style of communication, right? And it's like just like their own type of swordsmanship with voice, with words or whatever, right? And imagine we have a sort of inner art forms and outer art forms. Inner art forms, it's like the mind wielding the body. Outer art forms, it's like the body, you know, wielding the mind. And you know, a person has to, I would say, let's say if there were levels, there was a hierarchy to skill. Let's say a person, let's say there's 5 levels to mastering a skill. Let's say skill XYZ, you know, there's 5 levels to mastering this skill. The first level, the person doesn't know what they're doing. As they go up to the level, they reach a point where they know exactly what they're doing. And so once you complete, you know, let's say the exploration of the known dimensions of your intelligence, right? You go back to the unknown. Do you know? That means it's hilarious. Everybody's being kind of hyped up on, you know, attain knowledge, not realizing the pentacle of knowledge is a return back to the unknown. That means knowledge is a circle or a spiral, right? It has no end. Till the end of time, teachers can look at something in the world and be like, all right, you know, more homework, you know, but really we just want an advanced species. And an advanced species that, as the art of war says, a true warrior defeats the opponent without lifting his sword. So similarly, a compassionate mind is a greater symptom of some sort of inner realm mastery than a violent mind, because I will tell you, a lot of things on happening on this planet are too dramatic. If life was slowed down by, let's say, 20%, so many people will notice how many things in life that are happening are unnecessary intensifications of events, of battles between solipsists. You know, an angry person is a solipsist. You tell an angry person, it wasn't that guy you're hitting. You know, and the angry person's like, shut up, it was him. You know, it's like the angry person is like caught, is like consumed by that reality, by their inner reality, right? So we want to be like just like the samurai had two swords, we have the inner realm and the outer realm, and we shield them, we sheath them. We sheath our swords, and I will tell you, it's like an advanced civilization. Hopefully everything can be administered through communication, because communication is a very energy saving method of progress. And even if, let's say, the warrior has to use their intelligence, let's say someone is in a dangerous scenario or someone is in a hostile scenario, and of course, like if we want to have an advanced civilization, we should have advanced approaches to evil and good and all the possible dimensions in between and all the bridges and even the purgatory zones of consciousness. You know, human beings can live a life where actually, if they become numb to their outer realms or their inner realms, they become numb to the whole thing, right? So we have to. There's a way where some human beings, I would say, their life is frozen in a dualistic story. And so we have to unfreeze, our crew members. Honestly, it's just one giant rock flying in the middle of space. We're all crew members, and that's the healthiest attitude, That means regardless of who we are, it is our skill, ability, and our conscious living towards the collective victory that unites us, right? That means people in the future, in order to build something great, they don't have to like each other. Not everybody has to love each other. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I respect Mother Teresa, but in reality, there's many different states of mind. And so that means we want to have love, but a sort of indirect love, and you can call this honor. Honor means your inner realms care too much for the outer realms to see it break. So you live. It's like the last stance of all artists in the realm. It's as if, like, if you're an artist right now hearing me, just for a second imagine, a voice in the void is saying, you're here once. Make your life your masterpiece. That means your eyes run to the edge of your ability. Never try to be one step ahead. Never try to be 2 steps ahead. Just be as far as you can see. Go and trust yourself and go and explore the realm and go as far as you can. Because the moment you attempt the furthest possibility, the pentacle archetype of your psychology, when you in some sense combat that or confront that, you know what happens? You realize that God is man's permission to be free. And if man cannot be free from within himself, the outer realms are like, okay, run in the forest endlessly. In one episode, this was I think last year, more than last year, but in one episode I shared this very next level idea that in the future there will be robots, and these robots, like we will develop robot technology like these sun-powered, solar-powered, intelligent robots that are in advanced communication systems, and in all forests of the world there's going to be a communication robots just running, right? So in case anybody is stranded in a forest, there's an endless robot that can be accessed and can notice human life and protect it. Can you imagine a child, or imagine, you're young and you've gone camping, like I went camping as a kid, and imagine like suddenly being lost in the forest. There's documentaries probably of this happening, and imagine a bear is about to attack you and suddenly a robot, built by a genius inventor suddenly shields the child from the bear and immediately alerts the authorities about those who are lost in the woods of mankind, right? Because it is really about that a lot of the world is in the shadow domain, and a lot of it is in the light domain, and Earth is in the middle. Earth is the portal of the worlds. And even though we may say we rise or the stars fall, it's as if you only get to see what you were once before you physically transition. And it's as if you know what it is sometimes? In Persian culture, my background's Iranian, and in Persian culture, they have an incredible emphasis on hospitality. Because they're trying to be true to their ancestry. And back in the day, villages were like remote, so when people met others, it was like a guest was like a divine thing happening that day, right? It was like a spirit entering your home. So hospitality was very key. And of course, I would say in the Islamic world, they have this view that the guest is the sign of God. That means if life comes to you, it is a suggestion that something the Logos is requiring. We continue, even though the barks of dogma can be heard in Civilization 1.0. There is also this scene, and you could say it follows with Jungian psychology of when the person confronts their shadow self. Then when they accept their shadow, they can also be able to very easily accept their light without downfall. So strangely, when you accept your weakness, you stop being identified with it, but anything the person doesn't accept, it is held in their attention. And this is an incredible question. Are we what we accept, or are we everything before we can even accept it? I look at myself and I'm like, all right, I'm just a biological human being in an elemental world, it's like atoms have become people somehow. And it's as if the four forces, through the scientific view of electromagnetism, gravity, strong nuclear, weak nuclear, it's as if these four forces and the 17 particles considered to be in reality, and the 118 elements in the periodic table, it's as if the forces of nature were like sculpting hands. And it's as if light is really a messenger. You see, for example, in Abrahamic traditions, there is the beautiful imagery of Archangel Gabriel, or Jebrail in the Islamic context. In the Christian context, Gabriel, Archangel Gabriel. And Archangel Gabriel is like the messenger of God. What that means is it is God's voice entering man's ear. Because the archetype of the angel or the archangel was like the ray of the sun. God was the sun, its rays were its messengers. In the simplest metaphoric way that I can explain. And so that means the light of the sun is the will of the sun. The light beam is the will of the sun. Right? So Archangel Gabriel is like the light of higher dimensions finding the ears of the prophets, and in some sense the message that Archangel just the Archangel Gabriel archetype is there pretty much. It's just the imagery of light being a message. It's like when light, when the sun hits the earth, that's when there's a world to see, right? So light is a message. It is the most initial signal. Without light, the shadows are only here. And light is like whoever you are. It's like, as Rumi says, wherever you are, be the soul of that moment. You are the light in the darkness of the cosmos, the light of intelligence. That means if there were dimensions and human beings could be perceived, we are glowing. I think we are 100% glowing. Our behavior is so different that in some sense, I would say from a geometrical realm, every person when they speak, if there was a geometrical aura or a halo around them, or a geometrical sphere originating from the sound and how their brain moves, I would say it's like everybody has a different geometric halo. Aura. That means it's like the stories of our lives where we are emotional characters are contained in a geometrical truth. The unknown is the presence of the unknown, and this divinity, this concept of the divine light, let's say. Because many people don't know this, back in the day there was something that the educational system, or even the educational system that was being taught, that was being taken seriously, was divination. This concept of divination, and it meant having a relationship with the outer realms to in some sense understand what is going on in the inner realm. As if the shaman would get a bowl and put a bunch of stuff and throw the stuff on the ground, and where they landed in accordance to what he had set the moment to be gave it meaning. Our breath is holding our body. It is armed with possibility. And the future can be intense, it can be good and bad, or it can be multidimensional. And our victory lies in how fast human beings transition into a multidimensional state of, I shouldn't say self-identity, but world identity. That means we're done being selves in a world so big that every corner of it we look, the inner realm simulate a new personality. Right? So what that means is when new information enters your eyes, how can you be the same person? The new information has to readjust the context of your worldview, right? So every moment where there's new information, there is a new self. Or anytime we wake up from the unconscious to the conscious waking state, from the deep sleep state, we say there's a new self. And it's honestly, guys, passion of wanting to see. So if we take this notion again that we are not just a physical being, like there's a view, we are a body, and the brain is a film projector, and the film projector, the character in the film projector is somehow being able to control the body, right? That is like the modern secular view. But I would say, imagine now you're a mind that's projecting the body. So for a moment, we want to, when it comes to giving the inner realms its sovereignty, we want to, for a temporary moment, enter a solipsistic universe. As if the person closed their eyes, I'm talking about that universe, and there is a solipsistic component to it in the sense that attention activates thought, or activates perception. energy is endless, let's say. Right now, in common human understanding, we say the world is made of energy. And let's say manifestation is the shape of this energy. So energy transforms into a temporary appearance-based phenomena and then returns back to an energetic state. What that means is it's like before one is born, it's like potential energy, and then after one is born, it's like kinetic universal energy. Right, so universal potential energy, universal kinetic energy, let's say. Right, so when one is born, they are in the kinetic zone, and what that means is the best way their life can live is that they experientially fulfill, the present, the meaning of their inner realms. Their eyes walk. Excuse me, not the meaning of their inner realms, their individualism. So what that means is you satisfy the individual dimensions of life, and once you're content with the individual dimensions, you open up to the collective dimensions. The collective dimensions of life become more and more selfless. When it becomes more and more selfless, you stop being a person in a world moving. You become a world that is moving. And so the person or the personality, the objective position, the subjective position, the information or the life formation, once one becomes an ally of their own mind, and once the inner realms doesn't bother you anymore, because for some people their inner realms, based on how they have input like a program, like typing on a keyboard, how they have made decisions on this life, a person's inner realm could be their enemy. And if a person has a conscience is a sign that your mind is getting angry at you. The core intelligentsia of your mind. In the inner realms, a person can self-simulate. I never finished this idea, I think, but I wanted to share that in some shows, the main character defeats all the bosses, all the outer realm hardship, and then eventually comes to an enemy, which is like the person's shadow self, and the shadow self is like anything the person does, the shadow self mirrors, right? So it's as if one's shadow, people may be like, yeah, I confronted my shadow, but actually the idea of the shadow is that you cannot defeat your shadow. Your shadow is equal to the light you put into the room. So what that means is when a person confronts their shadow self, they come to a moment where they see they can't offensively attain. So they actually stop the pushing of the realm towards truth, and the moment the person stops fighting, that shadow reflection of themselves that they wanted to fight vanishes. So the last opponent is to get rid of the ego that still is looking for opponents. Because the opportunity that the mind provides, it's too great. Like our minds are like an unknown advanced technology that maybe we know just like 2% about, and beyond that 2%, it's unexplored, and people are fighting. It's like stupid, like it's like the most meaningless thing. Anyways, in this episode, guys, hopefully people have been able to realize that in their ability to observe the moment, they reestablish a conscious relationship with the energy that they're being. The inner dimensions of this energy, which I consider the inner realms. If you're someone who you have a lot of thoughts throughout the day, ultimately it's just piloting. So it's pretty much we wake up and our attention, like a how do I say it, like a predestination generator, sets the day. Do you know what I mean? Our attention is our ability. That means without concentration, there is no mastery. This picture is so incredible because the future should be this, but people not fighting with swords, people fighting with conceptual realities. That means it's as if people's inner realms should fight, not their outer realms. The outer realms, it's like if a person fights, and there's no way a person can fight without hitting themselves, because that's how force works. Anytime an object impacts another object, the same equivalent stress is produced from both sides, from the convergence point of the objects, right? So there's no human being who can, in some sense, not become less by having a destructive intent. Become less, and even if you think you're being powerful by being destructive, let me tell you what happens. It's not that order is going to bring justice to you, it's that a greater chaos will bring justice to the order. That means, think about it, that there's a level of, let's say small, medium, large, okay? And let's say there's a small level of order and there's a small level of chaos. And let's say there's a medium level of chaos, medium level of order, and let's say there's a large level of chaos and large level of order, okay? And some people may be like, Mr. Within, do you work in a coffee shop or something? What is this? But I'll tell you, just consider that there's these three levels, small, medium, large, of a battle between chaos and order. Now imagine the chaos of the small level, or let's say the chaos of the medium level, begins interfering with the order of the smaller chaos level, right? That means, let's say there's interdimensional cruelty, okay? So let's say from a medium level of chaos, that medium chaos helps the smaller chaos, and the smaller chaos, in some sense, let's say, defeats the smaller order, and the greater order may not be able to come, but the greater chaos, in order to stand in front of the greater order, must align all its dimensions. So what that means is pretty much the lords of karma will catch you, and the lords of karma have nothing to do with the outer realms in regards to a cultural thing. I'm talking about a mystical ideology. I'm talking about in the sense that if the person ignores, just like a character in a video game, you go somewhere where the map, it's can't go any further, eventually there will be a message from the system being like, hey, head back to where your soul wasn't burdened. So the greater chaos, let's say the medium, so the judgment of the smaller chaos can be the greater chaos. The judgment of the medium chaos, and the judgment of the medium chaos is the greater chaos. So the older brother of chaos brings justice to the smaller order, because interdimensional interference has to be abided by, or the higher dimensions get angry. That's a kind of poetic way of saying it, So it's like the whole universe is one system, that if a part of it doesn't act accordingly, the whole system fights back, right? And this doesn't mean a world of judgment where cruelty is victorious. It means a world where human beings are like, what have we been doing all this time, telling ourselves good and bad stories, when the world is based on novelty, when whatever impression we have, new levels of information or waves of information find us, new sounds find us, various trains of ideology, find the station of consciousness. The poet Rumi says, Just like a bird needs two wings to fly, the mind needs chaos in order to exist. That means an individual's mind without duality doesn't exist, so the dualistic state has to be protected, but the dualistic state is also a source of suffering. So it's as if we have to protect their suffering, because without it, it's like some part of the system will become imbalanced. So really, human beings, it's as if after they're done implementing their own ideas, they will listen to the Gaian mind. That means they will listen to Earth. And then we'll be like, oh my God, the Native Americans, the Native Amazonians, the shamans were so ahead of everybody in civilization. Because they understood nature can be an ally, but modern man has forgotten about nature, But I feel an evolutionary return to nature is inevitable. Man will walk towards the living world until the secrets have become him. Because ultimately, psychology is only alive to update. Without change, life would be a sort of purgatory photograph. We are blessed that we are in a moving realm. And so, one's presence beyond their personality is like the true teacher of any art form. Some things, guys, I'll tell you, you could say I'm pretty old school here, but I feel every art form has a spirit. And when I say a spirit, that means it's like a giant conscious rhythm. It's like a certain radio station for every art form, If the person decides, the universe activates. The inner realms are like, this is kind of poetic and humorous in a humorous context, but it's like the inner realms, the logos in the inner realms looks at the ego and it's like, hey, are you ready for me to kind of like express myself? And the ego's like, I don't know if I'm ready, but when the ego is ready and the ego's like, yeah, I'm ready, the logos means it's like man becomes the universe. So I can tell you that throughout the day, I feel, when I speak, I feel like an individual. When I don't speak, there is no individualism. There is what I call sight in emptiness. That means it's like the moment is just the quality of space is that there is nothing we can give it a quality to. There is nothing, it is the contentless. And so it's like, how do you define the invisible? How do you define the empty? How do you define the absent? How do you define the value of the number 0? Because without the number 1, the number 0 would have no need to have a number. It is just that our intelligence could perceive absence. We're truly piloting in a space-time continuum. And if you are someone in this world who has just taken the path of intellect, let's say you're a secular person and you're like, Mr. Within, I hear your poetry, but to be honest, it's just a giant information game, and it's like a theoretical physicist deserve not experiencing any other dimension of life other than sitting on a table and trying to solve a mathematical equation. And that I can agree to that view, but to be honest, it's like, if the world is multidimensional, then it's like the best approach is just to have projects to fulfill. That means this Mr. Within's gift project, right now I am in like this kind of state of mind, and it's like me as a biological being, it's like the expression is arising this way. But I know that eventually there will come a time where I have to step out of my own eyes. And that's why I'm saying to study the unknown is the ultimatum of wisdom. That means it's like, what did the wise man do? Realize the unknown world is there. That is the beginning of wisdom and also its end. The unknown is humanity's greatest teacher. But for now, we require strategic retaliation to it. Anyways, guys, I hope this episode was helpful. There's so much more to say about this concept of the minds being like a sword and shield, where I may dedicate more episodes to this. And yeah, you know, and don't use a tool unless you need it, because that's the value of being a natural being. The mind is like a mystery. I mean, every person has a different DNA. A person cannot even compare themselves to another person, because every person's constitution of reality in their inner ones is different. You know, they call this axiology. Every person's world of meaning is on a certain axis. And so the whole phenomenology of speech, like why does a human being need to communicate at all to other human beings? It's because our inner realms are awaiting to be found. Because for the first time, a species is caring for what's happening behind the eyes of the species as much as what is happening in front of it. The rise of the new conscious human empire. Not an empire of cruelty, but of incredible multidimensional tolerance. That means everything has multiple dimensions. Right and wrong can have endless multiple dimensions. And as long as we have the concept of infinity, any storyline can be taken and connected to an unknown variable, which then disconnects the possibility of the story completely. So I am saying it's like we're being ushered into an era where the animals, the evolutionary ape, is not just using sophisticated mouth noises, but it is realizing it is not language. Which means that an era where new languages may be created, and the great slumber of alphabet creation also awaken from that. I mean, who said Z is the last letter of the alphabet? You know, who said there's only one alphabet for a certain language? You know, alphabets are symbols. The symbols can evolve. The complexity of access. You know, so it's kind of like drawing a cube, you know, and writing a sentence, writing words on all the lines of that cube, and realizing in how many dimensions, right, you know, a line of communication can be found. So the mind is an incredible technology, one lifetime to figure what it is out. This doesn't mean forget the outer realms, but wonder about your inner realms. And as they say, when the student is ready, the master appears. I mean, it doesn't get any more zen than that. You know. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. Namaste.